2K Games, the developers behind the awesome first-person shooter series Bioshock, released Bioshock for the iPad a little more than a year ago. Now, if you have watched any of my stuff on YouTube, you know that I played Bioshock Infinite recently, and the Bioshock games are some of my favorite shooters that I've ever played. Now, I do want to preface this with, I'm not really a shooter guy. I never really have been. I mean, I liked Unreal Tournament 2004 when it came out. I liked the original Unreal Tournament. Quake was pretty cool, and I enjoyed Doom. But I've never really been like a competitive shooter guy. I play Bioshock for the story. Now, speaking of story, let's talk about what's happening with Bioshock for the iPad, because this is an interesting story. This week, they took the app off the App Store and off users' download lists. Now, on iOS, in the App Store, there's a button that you can hit that can bring up all of the apps that you've ever downloaded so that you can re-download them. This is a really cool feature, and it makes it easy for you to manage what's on your iPad since you have limited storage, or iPhone. So let's say I'm running out of storage, I can easily delete a game, then record my video or whatever, send my video to the internet, then re-download the game afterwards. In fact, iOS does this for you when it updates. If you are low on room, it will look through your list of apps, and it will delete the ones that it'll back up, like the save games and stuff, and it'll delete the games that take up the most room on your mobile device. Oh, and then it will update the software and then re-download the games when it's done. Now, they've taken it off of the download list. So I guess my first question is, why would a company do this? Off the top of my head, the only reasons I can think of would be one of two reasons. First, the company lost licensing rights to the game. I don't think that that's true, since 2K Games owns the right to Bioshock, don't they? I think that they do, but I'm not positive. And the other reason is that the game was broken by API changes made by Apple. This is probably the one that happened here. Apple makes changes to its API, or application portal interface, or maybe application interface. I don't know what it stands for. I'm not a dev. But Apple makes changes to its API all the time, and then developers have to fix their games. Can this be avoided? Maybe, but I honestly would rather that Apple or Google or whoever's making your mobile device have the ability to add features or improve current features without really having to worry about backwards compatibility. Okay, so maybe the API broke the game, so why not just fix the game? Now, why is 2K taking the game off of the App Store and off of your download list, preventing you from ever downloading it again? Why don't they just fix it instead? And I think the main reason is because of the way that mobile gaming works these days. Mobile gaming is really more about games as a service rather than games as a product. So if I went to the App Store and I looked at the most popular games on the iOS store, it was Game of War, Clash of Clans, Candy Crush, and Madden. And every single one of those has in-app purchases because they're games as a service. If you scroll through the list, you'll find that lots and lots of them have in-app purchases, and I bet if you look at the top grossing games, you would have to go a really long way down before you found a game that was a quote-unquote buy it once game. Okay? Now, why are these games so popular? The main reason is because these games are updated all of the time. And that's because they have what's called a long tail. They put the game out, lots of people will download it, but the initial downloads are just a small portion of the overall downloads that you get if your game has what's known as the long tail. Because your game is a service, people keep coming back to the game. And if the community around a game is active, then more people are going to end up downloading your game. buy it once games don't have the long tail that the service games do. So when they are no longer making money for the developer, they stop updating them. Now, let me be clear. I personally don't think there's anything wrong with a developer saying, I'm not going to update this game moving forward. As long as the game works when it first ships, the very first time that you ship the game, I think that the developer has done their job and they don't owe anything to the customer as long as it works when they first ship it. After that, I think the customer should be, quote unquote, on your own, and developers are perfectly fine, as far as I'm concerned, to say, no, I'm not fixing that game anymore. My problem isn't that 2K doesn't want to fix their game. My problem with what 2K Games is doing here, and don't think for a second that they're the only ones. I'm looking at you, Square and Sega, oh gosh, who else was it? I think it was Capcom? I think it might have been Capcom, but I'm not positive. But my problem is that they're pulling these games from the App Store. Not only that, but they're pulling a game, and I think this is the first time that this has happened, but they're pulling the game from the downloaded list. So, meaning that if you delete the app from your device, you cannot re-download it ever. Which means that you've now basically been ripped off. You have now paid for something only to have it taken from you, and unless you get a refund, I personally would consider that theft. That's what theft is. Somebody has taken something from you. They didn't come into your house and do it. They went into your iPad or your iPhone and did it. And it's just as sleazy. It's a really sleazy thing to do. Let's play devil's advocate for a little bit, though. Why would this kind of behavior for developers be acceptable? Why would it be okay for them to do this? Well, I guess my main question is, how long is Apple or 2K responsible for providing you re-downloads for a game? Think about it. Servers cost money, and before you guys say these companies are super rich and can afford to support the cost, let me remind you that they are publicly traded companies. This means that their absolute 100% first duty is to making money for their shareholders. If they aren't doing that, then they're not doing their job. It just so happens that in order to do their job, they make games for us. Making games is not their job. Their job is to make money for their shareholders. So, and they have to make a profit. And if the profit isn't growing, then the shareholders get upset. It's not enough that they make a profit every year. They have to have the profit that they make increase every year. And if it doesn't, then shareholders will lose their minds. I'm not saying that's right, but I'm just saying that's how it works. So the question is, how long are they responsible for providing us with the ability to re-download games that we've purchased from them? And the horrible and true answer is that they are not responsible for this. They didn't sell you a game. They sold us a license to download a game. And if you lose the game, you don't get to ask for another if they don't want to let you. It's like, think of it this way. You buy a car, and your car has a key. Now, you have lost your key. Do you walk into the car company and say, I demand you give me a new key right now? No, you'd probably have to pay for it, wouldn't you? That's because it's not their responsibility that you didn't make your backups. So I guess here's the next question is, what do I actually think? Well, I think I've probably telegraphed what I think pretty well. First off, whose fault is it? A lot of people want to blame Apple for breaking the game to begin with. But like I said before, I think it's really important for Apple to be able to change their APIs without worrying about backwards compatibility. They released betas for iOS 9 quite a while back. I'm not sure exactly when, but 2K decided to do nothing about it. I think 2K is without a doubt at fault here. They didn't want to update. They should have said, our game won't work on new operating systems. Download this only if you have the proper operating system, and left it at that. But instead, they pulled it from the store. There's a third group who is at fault here, though. And a lot of people are going to be angry at what I say here. And that's that we did this. We allow this kind of thing to happen. And think about it. Sega did this. Square did this. I think Capcom did this. And please, if they didn't, Capcom, I'm sorry. Just don't do it. But Sega and Square did this. And now 2K is doing this. And people continue to download apps from these publishers anyway. We flat out refuse to buy anything that costs more than a few bucks in the App Store, and that's really a huge issue. You're not incentivizing developers to put real money into making games on the App Store if you're not willing to pay for anything over $3. It's ridiculous. People get really upset that Square charges $15 for a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy games have hundreds of hours of content in them. $15 is not a big deal. Well, okay, maybe not hundreds of hours, but like 70 hours of content in a Final Fantasy game. I don't think it's ridiculous to think that we should pay for that content. Developers need to make money or they can't make games. That's just how it works. Everybody looks at the App Store and they say, look at all this garbage that's on here. But that's because the garbage is all we will pay for. We won't pay for anything that costs a lot of money to make. And so this is really our fault. It really disincentivizes publishers from supporting their apps over time as well. Geez, I put out this game, and the game I sold for, let's say it was an expensive game, and I'm using the air quotes right now. Let's say it was a $10 game on the App Store, which most people would say, well, I'm not even going to bother trying that. That's way too much. Let's say it was a $10 game. The company then has to support it forever? That doesn't really seem fair. The company needs money incoming, and if it's not a long tail game where they're constantly getting new money from in-app purchases and things like that, then they can't afford to update it all the time. So we complain that games have in-app purchases all the time, but then when one comes out that doesn't and charges $15 or $10 or something, then we're all like, oh man, that's way too expensive, and we won't buy it. And then that developer can't support the game for the people who did buy it, which are very few. The next thing to think about is when you are buying these games from the App Store, just remember to support the games that look like good games. Don't download the garbage and don't pay for in-app purchases all the time. My main problem with the App Store is when games have an upfront cost and in-app purchases. That is not okay for me. But then again, that's just my opinion, and people are welcome to disagree with that. Okay, so we talked about who's at fault. Let's talk about what should they do. And when I say they, I'm talking about 2K and Apple. Let's start with 2K. Honestly, I think the bad PR from this is way worse for their bottom line than server costs, so they should just suck it up and continue to provide the download. And honestly, I don't even know if they host the file on their servers or if Apple does. Now, and just to be clear, this was, I guess, a 2K Games customer service representative confirmed that this was a developer decision, not an Apple decision. Not that a customer service representative necessarily knows what they're talking about. They're not in the loop on every meeting. But somebody, I think it was on NeoGAF, asked, and they got an email back saying this was a developer decision. So let's talk about what 2K should do. They should put it back up. All right. They should definitely put it back up. And what should they have done? Let's go back in time. Let's get in our DeLoreans, hit 88 miles per hour, and then hop out and tell these guys, listen, you should have fixed your game. You know, it's not too expensive to fix your game. And it's good PR. You know, people would be happy about it. They should also, and if they're not going to fix their game, they should just warn the customers in the future. They tried to do this. It feels like they tried to take this out of the App Store on the down low without telling anybody, hoping that nobody would notice. It's almost as if they forgot the internet exists and that the internet is filled with people and rage. So it's just, they really should have warned everybody. Hey guys, we're going to be getting rid of the re-downloadability for Bioshock. Make sure you download it now sometime within the next month or so, and make sure you have backups because it's going to be gone soon. I also have a question about, I wonder if when you are updating your operating system on an iOS device, one of the things it does, I talked about this at the beginning, is that it goes through and will, if it needs room, it will delete some games or files or whatever. So what if it deletes Bioshock, and then when it's done updating, it can't download Bioshock from the servers? I wonder if the App Store knows that before the update. That's just something to think about. All right, so what should Apple do? Well, I think that Apple should make doing this against the App Store policy. I'm certainly not saying that they should require developers to support their 99-cent creations forever, but developers should not have the option of pulling apps from the store that people have paid for. Now, if it's a free app and you didn't pay any money and there were no in-app purchases, then the developer should be fine to pull something off the App Store. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's when you get to the point where people have paid money for the product and then the product is no longer available to them. That's where the problem is. So Apple should make that process against App Store policy. No, you cannot take your Bioshock game off of the App Store. It has to stay there. I can understand why Apple doesn't want to do that, because they don't want to have an App Store filled with games that are incompatible with the newest version of their operating system. So I don't see them doing that anytime soon. I also think that what they should do, and remember, I'm talking about what they should do, not what I think they will do. What they should do is implement an OS check when you try and download something. You know, you go to download a game, it checks and see which level of iOS you're on, and it says, I'm sorry, your device is not compatible with this software. Please try again on another device. And Apple should also offer refunds to anyone that bought the game. It'd get them a lot of good PR. What do I actually think is going to happen? I think that Apple will do nothing, because this is not their fault. And they'll say, this was a Bioshock, not Bioshock, this was a 2K Games decision. We had nothing to do with it. Send your complaints to them. What do I think 2K is going to do? And this is where it really gets ugly. I think, and I really hope I'm wrong, I think 2K is going to wait a little bit. And then they're going to re-release Bioshock. They'll call it the Game of the Year edition. They'll put it on the App Store for the same price as the original one that was up there. It'll have full updates and it'll be compatible with iOS 9. Or it'll be a free-to-play title with in-app purchases, because that's where that would make it a long-tail game. Okay? And the people who already spent money on Bioshock for iOS would not get this automatically. You would have to pay for it all over again. That's what I think 2K is going to do. Now, will they still do this now that there has been backlash on the internet that for some ridiculous reason they didn't see coming? I don't know. My question to you is, what do you think? Whose fault do you think this issue is? What do you think that 2K Games and Apple should do? What do you think users should do? And are you going to buy games from companies like Square and Sega and 2K that do this kind of thing in the future? Let me know.